My name is Nehemiah, and this is my story. This is the story of how I, a simple cupbearer, became a great man of influence and restored the city of Jerusalem. You have to understand that I am a man who is far from his home. Many years ago, my people had been captured and exiled from Israel for years. My people had sinned against God and not repented when he rebuked us. Our exile came through the hand of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He invaded Israel 3 times, capturing and taking people with him each time. Our banishment should not have come as a surprise, because the prophet Jeremiah had said it would happen, last for 70 years, and then the people could return to Israel. Years have passed, and King Nebuchadnezzar has died, yet we are still in captivity. King Artaxerxes of Persia now rules. Now I am a humble cupbearer to the king. Because of my responsibilities, I lived in Shushan, the capital city of Persia, and I lived in the citadel, that is, the fortified palace of the Persians. My body was in Persia, but my heart and interest were in Jerusalem, 800 miles away. I was interested in hearing from those who had returned about how the people and the city were doing. People might think that a man like me has more important things to do than think about a faraway place he's never been to and the people he was a stranger to. Yet, because my heart was for the things of God, my heart was no longer for myself but for others. I had a burden for Judah's remnant. Even though I had not experienced their suffering, I identified with them. One day, one of my brothers came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile in Jerusalem. They said, "Those who made it back to the area after the exile are in a lot of trouble and shame. The wall around Jerusalem is broken, and its gates have been set on fire." The news I got was not encouraging. People called them survivors, which was not a very hopeful name. The bad state of the people and the bad state of the city walls went hand in hand. The truth is that a city without walls was wide open to its enemies and easy to attack. They had no defense and no way to stay safe. A city without walls was always vulnerable and couldn't keep people and goods safe. If anything was valuable in an unwalled city, it could be stolen away easily because there was no defense to stop it. People who lived in a city without walls were always worried because they didn't know when they would be attacked and harmed. Every man is always concerned about his loved ones. The temple could be rebuilt, but never made beautiful, because anything valuable would be taken quickly. When I heard these things, right away, there was no strength in my legs. I sat down and I began to weep and to mourn. For some days I cried, didn't eat, and prayed to the God of heaven. I said, "Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, 'If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I've chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant, and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today, by granting him favor in the presence of this man. I didn't complain or see who could fix this problem. I immediately did what I knew I could do: pray and intensely seek God in this situation. I knew exactly who I was fasting and praying to. There are many gods that people believe in, but only the God of heaven can meet my needs. I prayed to God about my pain and stress and left it there. You see, as the king's cupbearer, it was my job to bring him wine and taste it. The king's cupbearer is a significant position in any royal court. The cupbearer was the king's special guard. He tasted wine and food before the king did, so that no one could poison him. The cupbearer had to be a man the king could put a lot of trust in. The cupbearer had to be a man of faithful and impressive character, in whom the king could place a tremendous amount of trust. If the cupbearer could be turned against the king, it would be easy to assassinate him. It was natural the cupbearer would often be asked his opinion on different matters coming before the king. After praying and waiting for 4 months, I finally got an answer. The day came when everything would change for me and my people. My face was sad as I mourned for Jerusalem. This was the first time the king had seen me sad, so he asked me, "Why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart." In the king's court, being sad was against the rules. This was true of many king's courts. The idea was that the king was such a great person that just being around him would make you forget all your troubles. The king could have thought he was badly insulted when I looked sad. When the king said, "This is nothing but sorrow of heart," I knew the king had noticed my sadness, and that the king took it seriously. The next words from the king could easily be, "Off with his head." I was very afraid, but I told the king the honest truth. May the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? The king said to me, "What is it you want?" I was petrified, because I knew I was going to the king for something significant. A lot was riding on what would happen in response to this question. This could change everything. I understood it was not my place to change the king's heart. I prayed and left it up to the Lord. After my quick prayer, I answered the king. I explained why I was sad. Jerusalem was a destroyed, disgraced city. The king's response wasn't "off with his head," but "what can I do to help?" I knew that 4 months of prayer were answered. I said, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it." Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, "How long will your journey take, and when will you get back?" the king was happy to send me. Oh, what an honor! I had a plan. The 4 months in prayer were not only spent talking to God. I immediately set a time, and I also asked, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah? And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal park, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I will occupy. I knew I would need letters of safe passage from the king. I knew what kind of materials would be required. I also knew what work needed to be done: the gates of the citadel, the city wall, the house I will occupy. I did not need time to make more plans. The 4 months were enough. The king granted my requests. The gracious hand of my God was clearly on me, as this can only be the power of the Lord at work. Everything was now ready to go. Following this, I traveled to the governors of the Trans-Euphrates region to deliver the king's letters to them. The king had also sent officers and horse riders with me from the army. I was all set. I also had substantial supplies of lumber from the king's forest. Truly, the king of Persia had responded to my invitation. Nevertheless, this was also the beginning of huge difficulties that had the potential to ruin everything. At the governor's station, I met these 2 enemies of Jerusalem and anyone who cared for the city's welfare: Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite. They were extremely troubled by the fact that an individual had come to check on the children of Israel and see how they were doing. As long as Jerusalem was weak and vulnerable, these 2 didn't care about it. Even though the temple was there and worship conducted, that was fine, as long as the people of God were not strong, secure, and free from stress. But that did not stop me from going to Jerusalem. This opposition came not at the heart, not at the vision stage, not at the prayer stage, not at the planning stage, but when progress started. I went to Jerusalem with a big dream, a lot of hope, a lot of prayer, and a lot of help from the king. People would have noticed me when I came to Jerusalem with a military guard and wood from the king of Persia's forest. But I didn't say anything about my task until it was time. After 3 days in Jerusalem, I left with a few other people in the middle of the night. I was here. For the first time ever, I was home. By night, I went out through the valley gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates which had been destroyed by fire. I knew I couldn't start making the walls until I saw how bad things were. I could have thought about everything good about Jerusalem. We were forced to leave Judah, but now we were back there. They built the temple. There were sacrifices and worship. Even though progress was slow, it was happening. There was a lot to be thankful for in Jerusalem, but sometimes you have to look at what's wrong, which is what I did. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the people there, priests, nobles, officials, or any others who would be doing the work. Jerusalem's people and leaders did not just sit around and wait for a hero to come and rebuild their walls. Most likely, they had accepted that it was impossible. It seemed like no one could fix a 100-year-old problem. Years ago, when someone tried, enemies simply stopped them. So they lived with it. Then I told them, You see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace." Now, when I came and explained the vision for the rebuilding of the walls to the leaders of the city, there was a tremendous amount of importance attached to the meeting. It was impossible for me to complete the task on my own, and I would have been in a lot of trouble if the leaders didn't back me up. I told them about the gracious hand of my God on me, and what the king had said to me. I assured the leaders this wasn't my project. It was God's project. They replied, "Let us start rebuilding." So, they began this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they laughed and despised us, saying, "What is this thing that you are doing? Will you rebel against the king?" They mocked and ridiculed us. Tobiah was a powerful figure because of his connections to the family of the high priest and his ability to solicit assistance from the priests. The name Tobiah means Yahweh is good, a strange name for a man who was an opponent of the work of God. Through his marriages, Sanballat was connected to the priestly families. These men were my fellow brothers and the citizens of Jerusalem. We might have thought they would have supported my work, but they did not. Opposition is always difficult. But when brothers disagree with you, it feels like you've been betrayed on top of everything else. Sanballat and Tobiah used scorn in their attack. They wanted me to feel mocked, stupid, and foolish. They showed their spite and despised us with a mocking edge. They asked me, "Will you rebel against the king?" This question shows that both Sanballat and Tobiah didn't think much of God's power. The fact that they asked that question showed that they thought the king of Persia was the most powerful person in the land. First, they were completely ignorant. They had no idea what they were talking about. Even if they didn't know it, the king had given his blessing. The king helped with the work. Second, they didn't care about how much power God had. Even if the king of Persia was against this work, it didn't matter, because the God of heaven and earth was for it. I didn't care about their remarks, so I told them, "The God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it." We built. The high priest and his fellow priests got to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. These were the gates of the wall. The gates were the most important points of admission and exit into the city, and the places most likely to see an enemy attack. Therefore, the work started at each gate and worked out from there. We then consecrated it. This is done to show that something is special and set apart for God's glory and care. These city gates were made especially for God. The priest knew that God wanted everything to be set aside for him alone. This included the walls and gates of the city. Every man's work was important. Each person or family was given individual responsibility for their work. For the most part, people joined in, but not everyone did. These lords from the city of Tekoa thought they were better than the hard work, so they didn't join in. They wouldn't submit. They would not bend their necks to what the Lord wanted them to do. The real issue was submission. The Yeshana gate was repaired by men of different professions, not professional builders. They didn't have the skills to do this kind of work. It seemed like they had a good reason not to do anything, but they jumped in and did the work anyway. Even though many people didn't think they were prepared or able, they built walls around Jerusalem. They laid its beams and placed its doors with their bolts and bars. I held each man responsible for the work he did. Each man was in charge of a certain part of the wall, and it was known he was responsible for it. No one wanted people to think they were bad at working for God. We got both high and low people to work together. The men who lived in a single room, the leaders and the high priest worked together. I didn't mind if people tried new things. I also told people to start with their own homes. And I didn't turn people away because they had sinned or lied in the past. When Sanballat found out that we were repairing the wall, he took offense and grew enraged. He made fun of us, and in front of his companions and the army of Samaria, he asked, "What are those feeble people doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" Tobiah the Ammonite, who was standing by his side, spoke up and said, "What they are building, even a fox climbing upon it would break down their wall of stones." After the work had already begun, they became outraged and quite agitated about the situation. Like most attempts to make you feel bad, the enemy's words contain a grain of truth. As builders, we would not complete it in a day. We did not have the best tools to use. I didn't argue. I didn't form a committee. I didn't even deal with the two enemies directly. Instead, I took it to God in prayer. I prayed, "Hear us, O God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders." So we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, because the people worked with all their heart. But Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod were very angry when they heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had started, and that the gaps were being closed. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem, and stir up trouble against it. Now, instead of just complaining or making fun of me, they made threats and made plans for violence. This was serious. The wall was built to protect against violent attacks, but now it looked like the wall itself might cause an attack to happen. People could have been afraid and worried that all their hard work might be for nothing. They wanted to create confusion among the people of God. Confused people will never move forward and fulfill God's work. They are usually confused because they are distracted by the tricks of their enemies, instead of focusing on God and His promises. Nevertheless, we prayed to our God, and because of them, we set a watch against them day and night. We wouldn't stop praying to God because of anything. We could have given up, thinking that God wasn't answering our prayers because the attacks kept happening. But we had more faith in God than that. I was determined. I wouldn't let the security of daylight or the sleepiness of night keep me from the work. This sent a powerful message. It sent a message to the people of God saying, "We are committed. This will work out because God is with us and will help us get past every problem." It sent a message to the enemies that they would not be victorious in their endeavors. The work that God has begun cannot be halted, since it is already in progress. It doesn't matter whether it means sleepless nights or tired days, because we are willing to do whatever it takes to get the job done. It sent a message to God. We trust in you, and our faith is a living faith, a faith of actions, not just words. We love and trust you, Lord. On the other hand, the difficulties did not stop. In addition to the difficulties that came from the outside, there were also difficulties that came from within. Judah said, "The strength of the laborers is failing, and there is so much rubbish that we cannot build the wall." Judah was supposed to be the tribe with the most strength and bravery. It was the tribe that produced mighty kings. The fact that this word originated from the tribe of Judah served both as a unique obstacle and a source of discouragement. The halfway point is a dangerous place. Much remains to be done, but fatigue sets in because much has already been done. The task is not yet over. Rebuilding the walls required not only construction, but also cleaning and carrying away the garbage that accumulated during the process. The ruins of the walls, lying in waste for 100 years, had become a collecting point for all kinds of rubbish. Clearing away the rubbish was not an option. It had to be done. The destroyed parts of the wall and the accumulated rubbish had to be cleared away so the walls could be rebuilt upon their foundations. The walls wouldn't stand if they didn't do this. And our adversary said, "They will neither know nor see anything till we come into their midst and kill them and cause the work to cease." Things were already in a bad state, and the discouraged workers felt like giving up. Now the enemy was making plans to attack the workers who were rebuilding the walls. The enemies knew by now the only way to get them to stop serving God and doing His work was to slay them. The people who lived near us came and told us about the evil plan. God's enemies did everything they could, but God was always in charge. The enemies didn't know the people who were loyal were listening to what they were planning. Those who heard the plan didn't have enough sense to know what to do. They were scared, and I think it bothered them that I wasn't scared too. I stationed some people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families, with their swords, spears, and bows. After taking a look at everything, I stood up and told the lords, officials, and the rest of the people, "Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and daughters, your wives and your homes." I commanded them to bring out their armor. It was time to get serious, to put on the full armor, and get ready to fight with every resource at our disposal. I looked at the big picture. Even though the task was hard, there was no reason to be afraid. I made sure they didn't forget why they were fighting. When our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot and that God had frustrated it, we all went back to the wall, each to our work. As soon as the adversaries noticed the defenses, they began to retreat. They didn't want to fight, since they were confident they would come out on the losing side. The enemies wanted the people of God to hand them an easy victory by failing to watch and be ready. From that day on, half of my men did the work, and the other half were given swords, shields, bows, and armor. Officers stood behind the people of Judah who were making the wall. The people who carried supplies did their jobs with one hand while holding a weapon in the other. After that, I addressed the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, telling them, "The work is extensive and spread out, and we are widely separated along the wall. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. Our God will fight for us." In addition to that, I instructed them to have every man and his helper stay inside Jerusalem at night, so that they can serve us as guards by night and as workers by day. Neither I nor my brothers, nor my men, nor the guards with me took off our clothes. Each had his weapon, even when he went for water. But then the men and their wives raised a great outcry. Some were saying, "We and our sons and daughters are numerous. For us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain." Others were saying, "We are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine. We have had to borrow money to pay the king's taxes on our fields and vineyards." My story is not that of money. Yet, money problems directly affected the rebuilding work. People had money problems because they worked hard on the walls and did not spend the same time providing for their household's needs. People had money problems because there was a famine, which made food more expensive, and it was so expensive that some mortgaged their property to provide food. People had money problems because the government kept taxing them, even though they weren't working as much, and the cost of living went up. These taxes were not the fault of those who they hurt. Neither I nor the people acted as if these taxes were unfair, yet they were still a hardship. People were having trouble making ends meet, since the loans they had taken out to make ends meet carried interest, and some of them had defaulted on their payments. As a result of this, some people were forced to hand over their children to their creditors to work as servants in order to pay off their debt. The wealthy were using the crisis as an opportunity to make money off of the less fortunate by charging interest rates of 12% per year. If I and my people did not find a way to do what God wanted us to do with regard to our money and money problems, the work of God would have stopped, without a single arrow being fired by the enemies of God. So I called together a large meeting to deal with them and said, "As far as possible, we have bought back our fellow Jews who were sold to the Gentiles. Now you are selling your own people, only for them to be sold back to us." They kept quiet because they could find nothing to say. My comrades and I began giving out loans of money and grain to the locals, and I told the nobles to stop charging interest. I instructed that they give back their fields, vineyards, olive groves, and houses, and the interest they were charging them. They all agreed and said, "We will give it back, and we will not demand anything more from them. We will do as you say." So I summoned the priests and made the nobles and officials take an oath to do what they had promised. I also shook out the folds of my robe and said, "In this way, may God shake out of their house and possessions anyone who does not keep this promise. So may such a person be shaken out and emptied." At this, the entire assembly said Amen and praised the Lord. And the people did as they had promised. My appointment as governor of Judah followed soon after, although neither I nor my brothers ever touched the governor's rations. The previous governors taxed the populace heavily, extracting 40 silver shekels from them, in addition to the usual food and drink quotas. Their assistants also lorded it over the people. But out of reverence for God, I did not act like that. Instead, I devoted myself to the work on this wall. All my men were assembled there for the work. We did not acquire any land. In addition, there were 150 Jews and officials dining at my table. Each day, 1 ox, 6 choice sheep, and some poultry were prepared for me, and every 10 days an abundant supply of wine of all kinds. Despite all of this, I never made a demand for the food that was supposed to be given to the governor, since the demands that were placed on these people were so great. Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies heard that I had rebuilt the wall, and that there were no breaks left in it, though at that time I had not hung the doors and the gates, that Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, "Come, let us meet together among the villages in the plain of Ono." But they thought to do me harm. I was able to see through the outward appearance, so I sent messengers to them, saying, "I am doing a great work, so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and go down to you?" But they sent me this message 4 times, and I answered them in the same manner. Using discernment, I would not only escape their trap, I won't even be distracted from my work. I was persistent in my discernment. Then Sanballat sent his servant to me as before, the 5th time, with an open letter. In it was written, "It is reported among the nations," and Geshem says, "that you and the people plan to rebel. Therefore, according to these rumors, you are rebuilding the wall, that you may be their king, and you have also appointed prophets to proclaim concerning you at Jerusalem, saying, 'There is a king in Judah.' Now these matters will be reported to the king. So come, therefore, and let us consult together." Then I sent him, saying, "No such things as you say are being done, but you invent them in your own heart." Then all were trying to make us afraid, saying, "Their hands will be weakened in the work, and it will not be done. Now therefore, O God, strengthen my hands." I did not mount an elaborate defense, trying to prove Sanballat wrong point by point. He wasn't going to waste my time. You don't satisfy men like Sanballat with facts, explanations, and evidence. You satisfy them by giving in to their demands, and I refused to do this. Sanballat would not be defeated by being told he was a liar. I had the discernment that the slander strategy was all about fear, and I wouldn't give in to it. No enemy can make us afraid. All they can do is try to make us choose fear, but it is up to us to refuse it. However, the assassination attempts did not end. When I went into the house of Shemaiah, who was confined at home, he said, "Let us meet and take refuge together in the house of God within the temple, and let us shut the doors of the temple, because they are coming to kill you, and they are coming to kill you at night." But I said, "Should a man like me flee in fear and hide? Should someone like me enter the temple for sanctuary to save his life? I will not go." Shemaiah made an attempt to instill fear in me and convince me to disobey God as a result of this fear. The temple was off limits to everyone who was not a priest, which included me. If I followed Shemaiah's advice, I would have been disobeying God and sinning against him. I came to the realization that God was not the one who had sent him, but that the enemy had commissioned him to make a prophecy against me. He had been hired to intimidate me, so that I would commit a sin by doing this, and then they would give me a bad name to discredit me. When word spread that the wall had been finished, the surrounding countries were struck with fear and lost their confidence upon learning that it had been built with the help of our God. The amount of time that was necessary to complete the task was astonishingly brief. After falling into disrepair more than a century earlier, the walls were rebuilt in only 52 days' time. Why wasn't the job done in the more than 100 years before? It wasn't that no one saw the problem. It wasn't that walls were not wanted. The destruction of Jerusalem's walls was witnessed by many, and everyone knew how it affected the city's residents. Yet no one ever moved past wishing Jerusalem still had walls. When the wall was finished, their enemies were very disheartened. It is glorious to dishearten the enemies of God's people and let them be discouraged for a while. Our enemies were disheartened not just because the wall was finished, but especially because it was evident that God did the work. A strong, secure people of Jerusalem were a witness to surrounding nations. Yet the nobles of Judah had no trouble being friends to such a man, because he had family ties to many in the tribe of Judah. Also, nobles of Judah were sending many letters to Tobiah, our enemy opposing the wall, and replies from Tobiah kept coming to them. Many in Judah were under oath to him. They kept reporting to me his good deeds, and then telling him what I said. And Tobiah sent letters to intimidate me. After the wall had been rebuilt, and I had set the doors in place, the gatekeepers, the musicians, and the Levites were appointed. The Levites and singers were there to guide the people in worship. The city walls were not reconstructed so that the people of Jerusalem could admire how wonderful they looked. They were reconstructed so that they may worship God in an even more glorious manner and with greater freedom than before. I put my brother in charge of Jerusalem, along with Hananiah, who was the commander of the citadel, due to the fact that he was an honorable man who feared God more than the majority of people. I said to them, "The gates of Jerusalem are not to be opened until the sun is hot. While the gatekeepers are still on duty, have them shut the doors and bar them. Also, appoint residents of Jerusalem as guards, some at their posts and some near their own houses." A tremendous victory had been won. The walls were rebuilt. Yet, the walls would not protect themselves. There had to be guards who did their jobs well, and the walls had to be watched. The gates were to open late and close early, because security was very important. Now the city was big and open, but there were not many people living there, and the homes had not been rebuilt. Then my God told me to gather the nobles, the leaders, and the people, so that their family trees could be written down. I wanted Jerusalem to grow and prosper. But before that could happen, I must know who is already there, just as when I toured the broken down walls. With all these events, something great happened. There was a revival. All the people gathered together as one man in the open square in front of the water gate. They told Ezra the scribe to bring the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had commanded Israel. Ezra was the man responsible for having the temple rebuilt and for returning God's people to worship. I just carried on the work that Ezra had begun. So Ezra the priest brought the law before the assembly of men and women, and all who could hear with understanding, on the first day of the 7th month. Then he read from it in the open square in front of the water gate from morning until midday, before the men and women and those who could understand, and all the ears of all the people were attentive to the book of the law. The book of the Law of Moses refers to the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. This was Israel's instruction manual for how to walk before God. And I, the governor, Ezra the priest and scribe, and the Levites who taught the people, said to all the people, "This day is holy to the Lord your God. Do not mourn nor weep." For all the people wept when they heard the words of the law. Then he said to them, "Go your way, eat the fat, drink the sweet, and send portions to those for whom nothing is prepared. For this day is holy to our Lord. Do not sorrow, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." So the Levites quieted all the people, saying, "Be still, for the day is holy. Do not be grieved." I was not merely concerned with the external reconstruction of Jerusalem. I also devoted myself to the religious reform of Judah. I saw a need, got up, got a clear picture of what I wanted to do, made a plan, and got other people to join me in my cause. I stand as a testament to faithfulness and perseverance. I lived far away from my home, but I never stopped hoping that I would be able to go back. I spent most of my life in exile in a country where people didn't believe in God, but I never stopped believing in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I was a prayer warrior who brought everything to God in prayer and prayed for my people. I was honored for my hard work and persistence. I cared so much about my people that I never stopped hoping for their return, not only to our country, but to the God that first called our forefather Abraham out of the same area and made a covenant with him, one that I believed would stand forever. My name is Nehemiah, and this is my story.